Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Keys to AWS Optimization. We are going to be talking about a customer story today. We have Siva from Trainline. If you are from Europe, you probably have heard of Trainline. And if not, you might not have. Trainline, an app I used this morning. I feel like I opened it up and went, I'm going to be talking about this on the show today. Made me smile. We're going to be talking about their FinOps journey and also some of the amazing tools that they have built in-house. So if you are thinking about creating tools for your company and you're like, should I buy? Should I make my own? We're going to be diving into that. Hello, everyone in the chat. Drop us a message and say hi. Say hi where you're coming from. But let's get started with our kind of opening question. Siva, have you had a frugal week or a splurgy week this week?
I would say it's kind of a splurgy week, kind of doing travel and planned preparations to meet my family and friends. So it is one of those weeks where like you spend some money and be happy about it. So that is kind of the week.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's like sometimes when you're spending money like on a bill, you're like, I do not want to do this. And then other times you're like, a holiday? Take all my money. I'm loving this. I'm trying to think now what my week has been like. I feel like I was jumping around doing some stuff, but I feel like I've had quite a calm week. Everything that I've been doing has been either free. I went to a really good what was it, picnic in the park event at the weekend that was free and stuff like that, taking advantage of the sunny weather. I said I wasn't going to mention the weather and I still got it in there. But very, very fun. Thank you for sharing. Let's get into the episode. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Steph Gooch. I'm an SA advocate here to help you with all your FinOps questions and on your journeys. And with me is Siva from Trainline. Do you want to do your 1-minute origin story to kick us off?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Siva Prakash. I'm working at Trainline as an engineering manager of FinOps. And it's been like 2 years of my journey at Trainline so far. And my primary responsibilities includes cloud cost budgeting, forecasting, and maintenance of like the cloud optimization, driving the cloud optimization initiatives, and maintenance and owning the FinOps tools and processes. And prior to Trainline, I have been involved in the FinOps space since 2016. And I have worked from like lean startups to the enterprises. I'm also one of the FinOps ambassadors recognized by the Phonx Foundation, and which means like I advocate a lot of FinOps journey and challenges and best practices, and making industry across people to educate them and to kind of create and build a cost-aware culture.
Amazing. I didn't realize you're an ambassador. That's so cool. And for those of you who don't know, the Phonx Foundation is a great organization. I was one of the OG members, been been in that group chat forever. But do you want to give a brief explanation of what the Phonx Foundation do/are for everyone watching?
Yeah, so they are kind of the commodity in which we share the best practices, and FinOps is kind of like open source, where like you have a bunch of knowledge in industry across a people, where like you have a bunch of knowledge about the FinOps and best practices, and we share different stories, and it's kind of like a open library of a FinOps, right? So you get talk and get to know more about the FinOps best practices there.
Yeah, I'd recommend joining. They are just a super great resource. I just love the Slack channel. That's like the main thing I feel like I'm here for a lot
It's
of
very
that.
engaging Slack channels, though.
Yeah, it is just, and also I just love people to ask questions. Like you can too. Reminder throughout the episode, drop your questions, comments in the chat. I'm watching. I can see all the highs. How are yous? I'm great, thank you. So please put any questions in there. We'll be looking to answer anything around the topic of FinOps. If we cannot answer it, we will make sure that you can email this email address, costoptimization@amazon.com, and let us, and I will follow up with any answers that I can find for you. Let's get into the show, starting off with a little bit, just so people know, we don't love to go into like super detail about the company because we want to focus on the FinOps, but I think it's worth noting kind of what you guys do at Trainline. So do you want to just give an overview of what Trainline does as a company?
Yes, so Trainline is Europe's independent rail platform. We sell rail and coach tickets. We help our customers to find best value, fair search prices for their journey. And always our aim is to provide easier, accessible, and enabling like environmentally sustainable travel choices for the world. So that's what we do.
Nice. I love that it's like obviously sustainable elements to it. The split ticket thing is the best thing on Trainline. That's why I use it the most. Trainline as well as a user, it helps you get the most optimized. I love throwing in like optimization terms when it comes to the company, but the most optimized tickets. So me and my friends love using it. I didn't realize I'm becoming like a salesperson for Trainline, but it is pretty good. So what is your role in the FinOps team specifically, and like your goals for the organization?
So I manage all the FinOps function at Trainline. So it's kind of my team is in charge of, as I said, like we do all the budgeting processes and training people and getting into the cost culture, because we have a different personas within the company, right? So we are bridging the gap between all the different personas and being like kind of cloud stewards for the cloud spend.
Mm-hmm. And if you can share, what kind of architecture does that involve for Trainline? Are you very like EC2 heavy, or are there other kind of compute elements? What's your kind of bread and butter services that you deal with day to day, or your developers deal with?
So our top spending services are like compute, storage, and databases, just like similar other companies. But we are kind of in a transition where like we are always advanced and move into the advancing in the technology. So now we are in a phase of like going cloud native tooling, from kind of moving from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service. It's not just about like cutting cost in mind. It's about like how do we position ourselves in terms of reliability, scalability, performance, and so a lot of other boxes as well.
Yeah, the kind of making yourselves flexible and being able to use more stuff that's built for the cloud is such a good kind of development process. So we're going to touch today on 3 kind of core areas when it comes to FinOps stuff we've touched on before. But like I said, we're going to have this nuance of the homegrown elements and tools for it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is cost visibility. So when we're talking about cost visibility, it says on the tin, where are people spending money? Why are they spending money? What are they spending money on? And we love using these tools. I feel like everybody agrees with, like, when it comes to FinOps, this is the thing we focused on at the start a lot. So making sure we can see this data, because if you can't see it, you can't save it. And if you have your footprint in the cloud, you can focus on effort. So where do you need to educate? Like I asked the question of what services do you use the most on? If you were like, oh, we're fully serverless, the optimization journey is very different compared to a kind of more static EC2 kind of culture. So we love getting these things. So in your situation, you guys have moved to creating your own homegrown tools. So let's start with that. Why, maybe just a high level, why did you decide to create things at home versus going out and purchasing maybe a third party, or even using the native tools more specifically?
So the decision was to simplify the cloud cost ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is where the main objective, and we started that initiative. So I don't complain, but the native tools are more powerful, and it has like kind of different filters and different cost components in it, and we have like different personas within the company, right? So finance will be looking at the cost in a different way, whereas the executives look at the cost in a different way, and engineers will look at the cost in a different way. So for an easier engagement, we need to kind of give a flexibility for the users to kind of use a one-click dashboard where like they don't need to fiddle with all the different filters. So that is kind of an element that triggered this challenge. And we thought of like solving that, because once you have a lightweight visibility tool that interacts with like internal tooling, and you can extend that into kind of like unit economics, and where you need to put more of the integrations into it. So that is how we started, like, okay, let's create our own tool, which will make the engagement much easier, and we can kind of create a cost-aware culture with the organization, as every stakeholders will be happy in using the same cloud spend in a different notions.
Yeah. When it comes to those different stakeholders, you had finance, you mentioned, who else is accessing the visibility tools that you utilize?
So it's pretty much everyone in the tech organization, from like engineers to the executives, I would say, and also sometimes we have the product teams as well, like who will use that tool.
Nice. And do they all look at the same view, or are they pre-customized to focus in on these different personas?
So we have created kind of the tool itself will have like a simplified dashboards, we call it.
Mhm.
Like we simplified that to three different personas, right? So for engineering, like it's an engineering specific dashboard, kind of giving into a summary dashboard, and then we also have like a deep dive dashboard for people like engineering manager or senior engineers or engineers who wanted to look into the fine grained details. And for finance, they will look at the cost in a different way. Like they wanted to track the marketplace spend, and then they wanted to look at the cost into the fiscal year. So we combine the cost widgets specifically for them to look at those views. And at the top level, like an executive, and they wanted to look at the cost, like, okay, who are the top spending
Mhm.
movers? What are the cost elements we have and where we need to focus on, and very high level pictures, right? So we customize the dashboards specific to their own use cases.
Yeah, that is so important. The amount of time people waste filtering dashboards to look at their team, it could be,
Exactly.
or their, yeah, exactly, on, or even their jobs. If it doesn't do it, there's like they need to have the feedback mechanisms. Actually, let's go into that. Did you have any feedback mechanisms from people who use the tools to back to the people who manage and make them in your team?
Yeah, so we have got a very strong feedback. Like most of the users who use the tool has rated the internal tool as like above the cloud native tools, which is kind of a bit of a satisfaction for us, like that we have
Yeah.
better. And also like most of like 80% of the users or repetitive users in the platform would seems like kind of okay, so they're using the tool on a regular basis. So that is kind of the indication on the feedback side of things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw we have a question in the chat, but before I come back to that one, I have one more. You mentioned integrations with other systems. What else have you integrated your dashboards with?
We are planning to integrate with the
Oh, okay.
different uh,
Okay.
tools and processes, but we started with AWS cost reports there. Like it's
Perfect.
just we have other BI tools where like we have a business informations. It's just
Mhm.
like plugging in them. So when we
Ah,
decided to now it's been like just 2 years for me at Trainline, and we have successfully like built the tool within a year. So we are in the next phase now. So the next integrations would be a part of our future journey for the tool.
cool. Yeah. And adding in that business data, everyone watching, I can't emphasize enough. People can't memorize all of their account IDs. You have to add in some of that nuanced data to make sure people can easily group stuff. And like we were talking about filtering for their job, if they had to go through and click every single time for all their accounts, it's such a waste of time. Like group them together, use tags, use OUs to help speed up that process for sure.
Yeah, so we have a grouping mechanism. So to
Nice.
help simplify that, so what we did was like we have a bunch of dashboards based on the personas, and then we group based on the business units, right? So some business units will be tied to certain accounts. So we merge that and give a kind of view of so one filter available, so that it's very easier for them to kind of choose between a one single click button on the filter to get a deep dive into the combined view of all their accounts. So yeah, we
Ah,
handle them with
brilliant.
yeah.
So when it comes, where's that question gone? Okay, so question from the audience. How long did it take you to get your own tools up and running?
It was like kind of 6 months effort from the beginning, from the scratch of like what I started with the product, uh, drafting the product requirements to like
Mhm.
kind of creating an MVP of the product, right? So it is kind of an exercise that I did in the previous companies as well. So it's my third time doing it. Uh, so it's kind of like I knew like what are the elements that are more important, and so yeah, it's kind of like a 6 months of journey for us to get the first MVP out.
Yeah. And saying that about doing it for three different companies, is there anything that you do now that you missed the first time that you did it that you kind of improved on?
Oh yeah, so we always had an improvements, right? So initially, like the thing that is different from like every other company is like using the internal tools, right? how do you make use of the internal tools that are available within the company? Like when you make building some of the products, and when you come up with a new solution and putting them into kind of creating those homegrown tools, the challenges you will have is like, how do you train people? They lose getting into those. So the one of the interesting thing that I learned about was like, how do you make use of the internal tools that are available, and then you create a solution on top of that. So that would easily engage people time, because they don't need to learn about the tool because they knew how to use the tool, and you don't need spending time in explaining about the training, and you will get like a lot of the other pieces checked out.
Yeah, every time people integrate a new tool, it's always like, oh no, I have to learn how to use something new. It could be just a headache. And people often default back to methods they do already use rather than maybe seeing the power of something new. So if you do have to do any training, the biggest thing I found when I've talked about demoing, especially tools, people know we talk about the cloud intelligence dashboards a lot on here, is figuring out what is the challenge that your product solves. So whenever you demo, like a tip for demoing a product is focus on, hey, imagine you're in this scenario, you're trying to do this, but you can't. How do you use the tool to do that? Is a lot more of a compelling and more memorable story than it is just to say, if I look here, I can see this. If I look here, I can see this. People are like, so make sure you add that element to the story. In the same kind of vein, oh, by the way, Richard says, wow, that seems pretty quick. I agree. 6 months to kind of get an MVP is a nice timeline. You guys should be very proud of pulling it through that fast. Sticking on theme, what are some of the other challenges you find with making your own homegrown tool?
Yeah, so it's kind of the challenges starts with defining the product requirements, right? As I said, we're not here to solve the challenge that like we're not going to replace something outside of the market. We're not going to be challenging the tools outside the market, right? So what you need to be doing is kind of drafting must-have requirements and nice-to-have requirements, and start with kind of the baby steps. So when I wanted to have an MVP, you can actually like have plenty of dashboards, which seems to be like, okay, so I need that for sure, right? But what you really want to do is kind of getting into the objective of like, okay, what are the top 3 challenges I'm going to address it for first? And that will unlock the way that we operate at every company. So every company's usage and challenges will be different, and they'll be dependent on one report. So how do you solve that? So identifying the requirements and the key requirements and what you do with MVP is very important, because that sets you at the right path for the success, right? So you need to spend more time in identifying with your stakeholders and trying to understand what they really need to use this tool on a daily basis. So the challenge would be like, yeah, that. And then like you also have every single tool will have different functionalities, and sometimes you need to go back and kind of bringing in some of the elements to it. For example, for the computation purposes, you really don't know. Like sometimes you feel like you have the data and you must access the data and put it and ingest them into the presentation layer, which is like the BI tool. And then what you fail at the end would be like, okay, so I should have done this ahead of time, right? Because I couldn't able to change or modify this bit of work, which is kind of necessary for me. For example, when we talk about the amortized cost, right? So when you have an amortized cost, it is a very easy filter that you get it in the Cost Explorer. But you need to kind of, when you build our own tool, you need to work that back, right? So you need to kind of, so how do you get the amortized cost for an engineering perspective? So does the tool will have the ability to do the computation at the end, or do you have to kind of prepare them ahead of time? So that is checks that we need to do ahead of time.
Yeah, there's a lot of extra work that goes into it that you have to not just assume. If anyone wants some queries around amortization, I would just put these in the chat. You can always check these out. Kind of amortization can sometimes be a bit of a headache, but these queries have some good examples of how you can calculate that kind of stuff out. So quick question, who builds the tools? Is it the FinOps team? Is it somewhere else centrally? Who does it?
It's a FinOps team. It's a
Okay.
ground FinOps tool within the FinOps team. And we also have like, paired with other teams in general, like getting a support to kind of work on the DevOps side of things. But the ownership of the tool still sits within the FinOps team.
Interesting. So what kind of background/roles do you have in the FinOps team to be able to build something from, like, do you have technical people as well as more financial background people, or is it a mixed bag?
It's kind of a technical, to be honest, like we have one developer who was like working with me to get this delivered. So we were like kind of 2-member team to deliver the product. Yeah. So I define the product requirements, and then the developer will then go ahead and kind of create out writing the scripts and using the different technologies to get that delivered. Yeah.
Brilliant. When it comes to like developing the visuals inside of these, often I feel, I mean, we've had Alex Head come on here and talk about building out dashboards and solving problems. But when you obviously mentioned that you create the kind of MVP and the description of what you want to build from it, do you, because I just as a dashboard person, what kind of process do you go through? This is so in depth for choosing the type of visual, because I often see, like, we talk about it, Cost Optimization Hub has a donut when you go on to the homepage, and I'm always intrigued. Like, I just feel like I go for pivot tables in QuickSight the majority of the time, and that is my default because I don't always need to see the thing. Although recently, like, there's different times, but the question is specifically, how do you focus on what type of visuals you need for different problems?
Yeah, so I start with kind of a strawman plan, right? Okay. So kind of I put myself into the shoes of the different stakeholders, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, for the engineering specific views, we wanted to know, like, how do we simplify the day-to-day operations? So more of the time, like, we get to ask the questions about, like, what are the cost changes that we are seeing? Like, we know like what the cost is, but they may be interested in what is the cost increase specific to, like, versus the previous month or previous weeks. So kind of creating that widget with a cost difference will make a lot of sense in with a percentage, right? It's kind of a comparison feature that has been recently released in Cost Explorer. So we have that and kind of widget as a kind of a widget in our view. So that translates their own story. So I put myself in a similar situations where, like, okay, so for finance team, what are the questions that I'm getting from the finance, right? Mm-hmm. And then I go with, okay, so I have this functionality within the tool, and then, okay, so what kind of dimensions that I can use? What are the fields that I can group together to kind of creating the extraction layers and stuff like that? So yeah, it's kind of doing a strawman plan ahead of time and give them the visuals about, like, you don't need to be very fine details, but you can actually, like, create what is the X and Y looks like, or if it is kind of a one-dimensional widget, and how it is going to help you on a regular basis. So when you establish that, and it's always good to get a feedback before you start, right? So building the tool is like, bringing child, developing, getting the child. So you need to kind of identify and always, never hesitate to go back to your stakeholders and get their feedback. So that is what will make you to be successful for sure. So if you're building something and that is not going to be useful for the stakeholder, then it's a waste of time, right?
Great advice. It's for the people that you're building it for. You just never have to put on those other shoes, because otherwise it's not going to work for people. Just because it does your job doesn't mean it's going to do everyone else's, for sure. And in the chat, they've also shared video. We did the start of this quarter, we did the do's and don'ts dashboarding. So we go right into detail about some dashboarding elements in that. So have a little look at that episode. But yeah, I do enjoy the child analogy. I feel like Secret Richard will utilize that at the end. I've now challenged him to utilize that at the end. If you don't know, if stick around to the end of the episode, because we have Secret Richard, who is not AI, who listens to the episode and creates a summary to make sure that you know exactly what we talked about in the episode. So stick around to the end for that. We also talked about before in the prep call, we talked about the diagram of like talking through the flow of the data. Do you want to show that to kind of explain like how you create this kind of a thing?
Yes, of course.
Perfect. Do you want to, if you on your side, just click onto your presentation and then I'll bring up your share screen. The text up. At least we haven't had any issues like last week where we add all the things. There we go. Perfect. And if you want to make it in presenter mode, sorry. The classic admin elements. There we go. All right, let's do it.
All right, so
Brilliant.
This is a high-level architecture. So we have like, I would classify this as kind of big boxes of 3 boxes, right? So one is the data producer, where like we produce the data, and then where we also have like element in the middle, which is like a data validator, where we validate everything that is like what we have built is true and it's okay. And then it's kind of like the data consumer is your the presentation layer, right? So basically, we take the data from the CUR, the AWS CUR customer usage report, and then we put them through the SQS queue as we get a new data. Like we send them through the queue, and then we do kind of data producer where like we enrich the data specific to Trainline specific business grouping, as we talked about, like combining the accounts into one view, and all that massaging goes in here. And then we also be doing the amortized cost, which we add an elements there. And since like CUR has like 200 plus columns, and we really don't need all of them, and we simplify what we really need to make it lightweight, to be honest. Yeah. And then what we also do is like we translate some of the naming conventions. For example, like you have a very big naming convention as a column, and then we need to simplify that for the user perspective. So we do all that mapping and tagging and recalculating the stuff that goes into the Lambda function, which we call it as a data producer, and we enrich the data. And that goes through the Kinesis queue as a charts. We just want to stick with the Kinesis because you can do it many ways, but we wanted to stick with the Kinesis because you have 24 hours of time period in which like it stays within the queue. And then it goes into the data validation phase, because we have added a lot more elements than what it was originally, right? So for example, the amortized cost. And then we grouped like an account, but we wanted to make sure is the calculations right. Sometimes it may get wrong, right? So we want to make sure the data is correct. So how do we validate? We then use Athena servers and we query the data separately, and we compare between what was the result through the enriched data, and then through the result with the benchmarking with the Athena query results. Once that has been validated, it's quite a good go for us to ingest into Elastic. And one of the interesting part that you see here is like when we also talked about is like using the internal tools, right? So Elasticsearch is kind of most companies using it for the logging purposes. It is not really kind of advanced BI tooling for very heavy computational purposes. So it's very good tool in terms of like the searches, name searches, and log collection tools. But we used it as kind of our application layer because everyone in the organization knows how to use the Elastic because they have logging tooling, and they know in and out of like how to use the tool. So we thought like, okay, so let's put that into the Elastic so that saves a lot of time for people to get used to the tool.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, utilize things if you already have. Don't duplicate any of those licenses costs, folks. We don't need to waste money on that. And I love that you're doing data validation. I think that is such an important step, because not only because you need correct data, but from personal experience, I found that when you're sharing things like cost with other teams, if they ever find a discrepancy, they immediately will never trust your data and they'll revert back to using Cost Explorer or whatever. And if you're trying to push them towards this tool, which is better because you spent more time on it, that's the big thing, isn't it? You spent time, you've made it personal to your company, then they won't trust it again. So taking that extra step, like whether that takes you an extra few weeks or whatever of deployment to make sure things are right, is something that I've had to learn to do, because I'm like, let's get it out there, let's do it, and then it backfires.
So kind of creating the credibility is more important of like being in this position. And when you talk about the cost, people have to trust us, right? So validating is kind of a crucible factor in developing the tool.
Definitely. And as well, the kind of adding the enrichment to the data, I think, is also that valid extra little step to do. Speaking of kind of adding things to the data, do you guys tag your resources?
Yeah, so we don't actually manage, and as a FinOps team, we don't manage the tagging. We
Okay.
have like platform engineering teams and who sets the best practices, and we request people to tag their resources, right? And we have like a tagging policy internally.
Okay.
But for tools like this, what I would recommend would be like so many changes comes up, right? So for example, I told, right, we have been moving from the legacy architecture, like infrastructure as a service, to the platform as a
Mhm.
service, right? So we are doing migrations from like existing infrastructure to the new one, and we also have kind of organizational changes. So you need to have kind of a mechanism where it's kind of an inventory where
Mhm.
you will manage that as kind of a translation layer. So you don't need to wait for the underlying architecture to be updated on the tags. Where like you can, it's always a best practice for you to kind of create a translation layer so
Mhm.
that even if there is any changes to the tagging, you can always manage that within the translation layer.
Yes. Yeah, there's that extra bit that you need between. No, I think that's really important to add that, and it's quite must be quite nice not to have to manage it from a FinOps point of view. Like it's true, it's the infrastructure, and so you're just pulling in that extra data. We just got asked a question. Steph, can I ask questions here? Yes, you can. We'd love to hear questions. Please pop any questions you have in the chat. I'll be watching, and I'll bring them up and see if we can try and help throughout the episode. Yeah, the tagging age-old question about tagging is always interesting to see how people handle it. So last question on the visibility section before we move on. What are some big results or wins that you've seen from implementing and kind of creating this dashboard?
More engagement, reuse of the existing tools. People are like, as I said, like the engagement has become uh, easier with the
Yeah.
simplified tools, and also like similar tools in the market is costing a lot more money. We are just spending like 1/3 of what is a similar solutions available in the market. So all win-win situations.
Yeah. Brilliant. That is great to hear that there's kind of like success born out of this, which is really important. So, yeah, folks, any questions about visibility, feel free to drop them in the chat. But we're going to move on to a little bit more of, unless, did we miss anything? Is there anything else you want to say about visibility?
No, I'm good.
Cool. Forecasting. Still in the visibility-ish world, but forecasting and budgeting, I feel like is such a, I mean, it feels like something we should should be easy by now, but because of the flexibility of the cloud, it's always going to be a bit different. You can't forecast as accurately as we would like to because we have these things with developers, and developers can build stuff, and sometimes they build something that's cheaper, sometimes they build something that's more expensive, sometimes they do build, sometimes they don't build, sometimes there's more days in the month. There are all these things that we have to deal with, and it makes it so much harder. It's not so flat. But as we always say, the benefit of that is that you are only paying for the resources that you actually need and use, so you don't have to waste all this extra capacity because of that certainty of the month over month. So when it comes to budgeting and forecasting, let's start with a simple thing. Let's start with budgeting. So do you guys utilize budgeting, and how do you kind of roll that out at scale?
Yeah, so we do that on a yearly basis, and also we like do kind of forecasting, reforecasting methodologies as well. So
Yeah.
for the year preparations for the financial year, when we get into, like, we start this ahead of time, like a quarter ahead of time, before the next financial year starts. So what we do is like we engage different people within the company, different stakeholders within the company.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like we starts with trying to understand what are the new projects that is coming in, what are we thinking about, like what the product prioritizations are, and what are the technical the features that we're going to add into our products. So kind of getting into that details and trying to understand what stakeholder has in their list of a projects, and then we will gather as much of information from like the past cost history data, as in we do a kind of a requirements gathering session. So once we're done with that, what we do is like then we decide whether like we have so many different models we use at Trainline, right? Because all the different businesses on a different teams will have like a different patterns of the cloud usage, right? So some of them, for example, like the online platform we have, so we drive the cost based on number of people visiting our website. So the visits is our cost kind of key driver, which is directly proportional to our cost in somehow. So we try to identify that kind of element and try to classify which are all the costs that are like directly ties better with the cost drivers versus what are like the cost, for example, the non-production environments and the dev staging would be like it will have its own trend-based data. So for that kind of elements, we use like linear and exponential uh, uh, and a smoothing formulas to kind of forecast the data. So that is kind of the phase where like we do a modeling and we do kind of different modeling for the product budget line, just basically based on like the cost driver based. And then for the other lines where like even the non-prod will have a different usage and the dev staging will have different usage. And if you have like security or data platforms, and they will have different usage. So we don't like stick with a one method for forecasting where we diversify to kind of better align with what the usage and trend, and we create a model specific to that. And once we're done with that, the next piece of work would be like, okay, so now we know the cost increases, and then comes with like kind of, okay, what are the improvements that we can do from the financial perspective, right? Like you will have like a plenty of savings opportunities sitting around, and you need to be like taking them into an account. And then like what are the reservation opportunities, or like what are the low hanging fruits that can be achievable. And we also factor that in. And once we're done with that process, we kind of come up with two different numbers, because budgeting is always based on assumptions, right? But you need to validate yourself that you're doing the right thing. So what we assume like best case and worst case scenarios. What is the best case, right? And where do you land this year with? And then what if the worst case looks like? And where do you land the number with? And we have like get the two different numbers, and then we always go with the middle of it. It's really back to the stakeholders, and we need to get their input as well, because once you help them setting the budget, what you need to do is like you need to get with the stakeholders, because they're going to manage the budgets, right? So we need to get a sign off from the stakeholders saying, okay, so I'm good with the numbers. So once we're done with that, then it gets into kind of finance levels. And because we also take the high level details from the finance about like what is the high level budget number we need to stick with. So we need to align that, right? So now it's kind of a phase where like, okay, should we prioritize this project? If we're going to prioritize this project, it's going to be costing XYZ. So we prioritize and deprioritize some of them. And once we get final figures, and we get a sign off from engineering stakeholders and then finance and executives.
Interesting. I love the kind of the between concept. I haven't heard that before, of taking like best case, worst case. So taking that like, I'm assuming if they did no optimization, it just stays as is, versus if they did a lot of optimization, what would those be? Okay, so we've got two questions I'm just going to jump into from the chat. The first one is, have you tried using Kudos? Curious to understand why your team built a solution versus use one of those. So yeah, have you guys checked out Kudos and kind of use that information from those?
Yeah, so we love Kudos for sure, right? So you have like pre-built dashboard ready, but one of the challenge with that is like you need a quick site license. So we need a license for every single user who wants to access those dashboards. So that overhead of cost will be very higher. Whereas like when you look at into return of investments in creating your own tools and using the existing tools within the company, like which has been used, you don't need to pay for the additional licenses costs. So that is we don't use it, but internally we do use Kudos. So
there you go. So yeah, so I see what you mean at scale. If you haven't, that it's a big thing. We've seen this before with customers who have other licenses, because licenses for BI tools are a flat fee and everyone's got to pay it. It doesn't matter if they use it a lot or not. And so, well, it doesn't. QuickSight has a scaled usage, but yeah, if you're already paying for a license, people are like, why would I use both? So if you don't want to migrate all of your existing workloads to QuickSight, if you do, let us know. We can always help. Reach out. Cost optimization as amazon.com for any questions about that kind of thing. But yeah, it makes sense that it can be quite a overhead cost if you weren't expecting it, especially when the whole point often with these teams is that they're sold as having a way to reduce money. If the first thing you do is ask for thousands of dollars, then it could be a bit of a hard time to do it. We've got a fun question in the chat as well, which I haven't had for a while, which is, do you have a favorite service that you use at all? Anything fun? What jumps to mind first?
Definitely compute service.
Okay, the easy.
Making it easier. And
yeah,
from the FinOps perspective, you can control the cost on the compute.
Do you specifically mean EC2 or anything
EC2,
specific in the compute world?
ECS and all the Lambdas. Love it.
Yeah. I feel like Lambda's mine. I remember when I first started using, like, I have a classic issue where I became a developer and I used a lot. I found Lambda. I remember Lambda coming out. I felt old when I say that. I remember Lambda coming out and I was like, oh, this is cool. We can start using this. And it was so easy that I built everything with Lambdas, even if it's probably not the best idea. I'm just like, Lambdas, give me some Python. I make this. So yeah, it's quite funny. Great question. Any other questions, guys? Please drop them in the chat. So once you have these kind of budgets and these like decision number, how do you keep yourselves on track for those numbers?
Yeah, so once you set budget, which is great, because that is kind of first level of optimization that you do, right? So giving stakeholder accountability to bigger numbers. And then what really makes it interesting and engageable would be like a kind of having a cadence in which, like, how do you engage them on a regular basis, right?
Yeah.
So we have kind of a monthly catch-ups with our tech forums, right? So we have like a service management reviews, for example. So that is the forum in which, like, we get with the people and we not only talk about the cost, we also talk about reliability, the cloud governance and security and all the different pieces. Cost is also one of them, right? So we engage the stakeholders there and trying to kind of forecast, because it is not necessarily like the cloud cost increases at risk, right? So we want the cloud cost to be increasing because we wanted to expand our business. But what we want to quantify is like, are we getting a right level of efficiency and return of investment from it? So for to do that, what we do is like, and also like you want to stick with the budget, right? So we do that kind of a monthly exercise of reforecasting, because we have, for example, sales coming in, the ticket sales coming in, and we also have unforeseen cost increases due to some product features, and we want our engineers to be creative and innovative. We don't limit them to doing things, but what we do is kind of giving them a reforecasting figure. Okay, so this is gonna land over this XYZ service cost, which has increased in the week of like third week of the month, is gonna, if it continues throughout the year, we're gonna land the year's budget in XYZ numbers, right? So then it becomes much more interesting. Okay, so then the product and engineering team would be thinking like, okay, I need to deprioritize some of my stuff, right? So it becomes a natural indicator for like, you give them the ownership and to decide what they wanted. So engaging team on a regular basis would be the key to success and to staying within the budget. And gladly, like, I want to highlight this, like, our budget variance in the last 2 years was like less than 3%.
Well done. That's very good. That's very hard to do. And yeah, I like your point about reading regularly, because what you don't want to do is you set these budgets at the start of the year, no one looks, and at the end of the year, you're so far over, you're like, oh, we need to cut costs like in the next 2 months. And it just becomes like a spiral. You need to have this continuous thing. The same way you do patching, guys. That's what I always think of it as.
Question, for example, like, you have situations where you plan some of the datas and go ahead with kind of executing it, right? So, and then you come up with kind of a barriers and unforeseen cost increases, which you need to accommodate them. But So how do you still track within the budget is kind of deprioritization, and then
Yeah.
refocus is the key. Like, do the refocus as much of you do a refocus like a weekly basis. That would be amazing to stay within the budget. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, definitely. One more question before we move on. We've got 15 minutes left, so we're going to cover two more kind of high-level topics. Do you guys automate any of your reporting? Do you share out things regularly as well as your cadences?
Yeah, we try to automate some of them as we have like internal tools as well. But specifically, we need to keep that budgeting process outside of an automation piece because, for example, we have been doing a double running of our infrastructure due to the migrations, or get to a point where like savings initiatives for the 6 months of time, right? So when we prioritize those things and when you put them into the mathematical model, so that is going to assume the rest of the year is like, okay, so the cost is going to trend down or cost is going to trend up, but that is not the case, right? So we are getting into like advocating the process to make sure how do we better them. So for now, like we are still managing that as kind of internal tooling, I would say like semi-automated, where like we get the reports in a different cost dimensions, the way we want to group them. So that will be there, but getting into the modeling of the cost is still not, we're not very comfortable with automating the process.
Fair enough. Which reminds me, next quarter when we go into Q3, we're going to be doing hopefully a vibe coding episode again about creating reports that are emailed to you automatically from Athena, just for a fun little session, maybe over 2 sessions. So make sure that you keep this time blocked for the end of the quarter. I forgot to say at the start, this is our last episode for Q2. We'll be back on the 17th of 07. What's that? July? Yeah, so about a month's time we'll be back to keep doing it. But we have 2 more questions I want to jump to in the chat. The first one, what is a piece of advice you would give someone starting in FinOps now?
Like get into the Phonx Foundation and try to go through the different phases. Like you have so much of the details that you have. It is not like you're starting now or like where you are in the journey. It's good that you're starting with the FinOps things, right? So it's kind of an advice where like there are so much of well-established and best practice documents and kind of like user stories and like you have everything that you need when you go to the FinOps documentation piece. But get started with the FinOps. That would be the advice. Don't delay the FinOps practices.
Yeah, join the foundation. And I think the thing I would say is figure out what your business goals are. Because a lot of people I speak to, and from myself, when they start doing FinOps, if they've come from somewhere else, maybe they've watched episodes in the show and they're like, I'm going to focus on optimization. And then the business is like, no, we need you to focus on cost allocation, cost visibility, like these different tagging, unit costs. There are so many different elements, there's so many different scopes that you can look through that you have to understand what your business wants you to do, because otherwise you will never succeed. If you just keep saving money, that might not be the priority. So just from a piece of experience, that's it. And then someone else put in the chat, if you're just starting, check out Keys AWS Optimization. Yes, subscribe to the YouTube channel and make sure you check everything live we see. Thank you for the plug, guys. And a last question, which brings us on to one of our last topics, which is, how is your team managing cost optimization actions like right sizing, resource cleanup? Are you using things like Optimization Hub, or is your custom solution also doing that?
Yeah, so when it comes to optimization, I like the simplest formula of how do we look at the cost, right? The cost is the times of unit price and times of usage. So we want the piece of like the unit price, which when I say like it's a FinOps team wants how do you optimize the unit prices, and then there comes the usage where we want engineers to make an actions, right? So we kind of create a best practice documents on the top spending services and right sizing, because every company's application usage is completely different. They may be needing like 80% of the CPU, which is available at a time. So we we be the advocate for like our internal architecture. Try to understand your internal architecture and create like your own best practices. And then once you're done with all that elements, and what you can do is like kind of creating a cost efficiency dashboard where you identify like top spending services and bring them into that gamification process of anything that you wanted to measure in efficiency. The simplest and successful formula would be like identify the potential savings opportunities. One minus potential savings opportunities divided by your total spend will give you an efficiency rating. So it doesn't really matter like you have smaller resources or like smaller accounts of cost or now spending in a millions. It is always good to check your overall efficiency score. That gives you a kind of level of accuracy, and also definitely use the unit economics as much as possible. So that will leave you to the directions of like where you need an optimization. And sometimes like cleanup is not a priority for the organization. Cost is not a priority for the organization, right? So we don't always want to do like optimize the cost. Sometimes reliability takes the precedence, and a performance takes the precedence. So it's about the balance. So, but you need to have a kind of a measuring KPI to make sure you stay on track within the KPIs, and set targets within the company for those KPIs as well. So like when to pull the levers versus like let
slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the KPIs. Always good, because otherwise, I think sometimes people miss as well. KPIs help you track the impact. So again, you have something to show what's happening, what the things you're doing and investing in, the cause and effect with those. So when it does come to optimization, if you guys decide on something like a campaign or something you want to focus on specifically when it comes to optimizing, how do you roll that out? How do you educate developers? What's the kind of processes you use?
Yeah, so we engage them through as I said, like we have forums, and then we also like and our regular forums, right? So it's about like you don't need to create an altogether new process that's fits
just use the ones.
Yeah, the existing one which is successful, and in a way like you interact and get with the people. And then for us, like we have a forum already existed, so I have used them to get into the details of like what other priorities are, like engaging them on the different priorities. So
brilliant.
Like,
okay. Yeah. So on to our last section before we go into our secret Richard with the summary. We're going to talk a little bit about operational stuff. So we spoke before when we were chatting about having an efficiency, targets and scores. What made you want to do a kind of score for this kind of work?
Yeah, so we are spending like huge monies, right, on the cloud as a pay-as-you-go model. As it allows us to be scalable and being like scalable as possible, but it also comes with the risk on the cost on the other side, right? So as I said before, like we want our business to grow by XYZ sizes, but how do you track like, okay, so it is not always the cost increases is kind of a risk element. What we need to ensure is like, if you need to have a mechanism in which like to calm yourself that you're doing the right things, then having that cloud efficiency score is kind of a powerful metric for you to use it to gauge yourself like, okay, so I'm doing good, right? So yeah, having like a one KPI which is easily measurable of like on a cloud and AWS, you have like plenty of services coming in, right? So we have like a different usages as well, but having that efficiency and checking yourself and benchmarking will help us in track where we are within that cloud spend. So that is the motivation.
Brilliant. And very quickly, the last question before we finish up is we also talked about you having kind of like red and green elements to it. What happens when each of those scenarios come up with your resources?
Yeah, so when it falls under like green area, so that is kind of an indication that that particular business group is doing very well, right? And when there comes into the red element, and you set like kind of a target where like 60% across the company has to be in a green or red. So it is kind of like gamification process that was successful from my previous experiences, right? So when you do that, people get engaged immediately because no one wants to be on the red side. When you put them in
Yes.
dashboards, they always want love to be on the greener side. So it kind of creates a healthy competition within the
Between
company
people.
to
Yeah.
be top
Brilliant.
dashboards.
Yeah, get those high scores. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to do our Richard summary before we close. If you don't know, Richard watches and he listens to our conversation and comes up with a fun summary of the episode. I have not seen it, so I have to read it blind. And this is a great way. You can check out all the end of our videos to see what the summaries are. This week is Trainline built their own suite of bespoke cost visibility tools. Like Thanos, they said, fine, I'll do it myself. Unlike Thanos, it ended up lasting in victory with a third of cost versus similar third-party tools. And they prioritize unit cost optimization and scoring efficiency. Love it. Thank you so much to everyone who is watching. A last little plug. If you have made it to the end of the video, make sure to go to this LinkedIn group. So search for either the customer optimization team, or search for this group here, and this will take you to our department's new LinkedIn group, so secret invites only. Subscribe to that group so you can see all of the content, all the announcements that our team puts out. So if anyone's a fan of optics, make sure you go and log into that. If you have any emails or any questions you want to ask and haven't got it to the show, please email costoptimization@amazon.com. And if you want to see a summary of all of the episodes that we do in a kind of written blog format, we have this live stream information. This is also where we announce all the dates for the new shows, what's coming up. So please make sure that you check out that page and kind of star it, give it a little favorite so that you don't lose it. So thank you so much for coming and sharing on these stories. I always love having customers on, and it was a nice way to close out the season. As a reminder, yes, we are on break. We're having a nice little month break. We come back on the 17th of July. We're going to be doing lots of different topics around all your favorite optimization stuff. We're going to do some hands-on topics, some hands-on building like we did last time, more customer stories and things like that. But that is all. I've got a nice little thank you for the stream, which is lovely. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Like and subscribe, and we will see you all in a month's time. Thanks from me, Steph. Thanks from Siva. See you guys next time. Bye.